Well, everybody, welcome to Relationship Matters, Empowering Conversations. I am so excited for today's episode. I started this whole podcast because I think that relationships are central to our lives, and we all have that in common. We have relationships with other people, with ourselves, and so I just thought that we would start having empowering conversations around how to have healthy relationships and talking about the things that hurt relationships. And today I'm really excited to introduce Richard Capriola. Richard has an extensive experience in working with especially adolescents with mental health and addiction issues. And so Richard has been in the mental health and substance abuse counselor for over 2 decades. He worked as an addictions counselor for over a decade at Menninger Clinic in Houston, Texas, where he treated both adults and adolescents diagnosed with mental health and substance abuse disorders. He is the author of Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. And I am so excited to welcome you, Richard. This is such an important subject.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and I really appreciate you taking the time to host this discussion, which I hope everyone will find interesting and informative.
Yeah, and when I was talking to you and we met and we had our initial kind of setup meeting here for this talk, I was just really taken how passionate you are about trying to bring this subject to matter. It just seems like people kind of, I think a lot of people feel alone when they have kids with mental health or with addiction issues, and so maybe they just don't want to talk about it. But it seems like a lot of the experts in so-called experts out there are not even really talking about a lot. The government's helpless to do things about it seems. And so I just really was excited to meet you and to be able to have this conversation with you. And so I guess we'll just start off, maybe just give us a little of your background, and then we will jump into some questions here. And I'm really excited to leave parents with very practical solutions today. And I really want to encourage you, if you're listening to this and you know parents who have family members, kids that are in addiction or in mental health situations, make sure you share this video, because this is going to be a very rich conversation and it'll have a lot of tips and a lot of clues in it. So Richard, give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, sure, Mark. Thank you. I started out in education administration, where I worked for about 3 decades, then transitioned over into mental health and substance abuse work. Spent some time working at a mental health crisis center where we treated people with both mental health issues, struggles, and with substance abuse issues. Went back to the University of Illinois and obtained a degree in substance abuse counseling, and then worked for over a decade at Menninger Clinic in Houston, Texas, which is a large psychiatric hospital serving adolescents and adults from around the world. I was employed there for over a decade and treated both teenagers and adults diagnosed with mental health and substance abuse issues. And so many times, Mark, I would sit across from a family and I would go through their child's history of using a substance, and they would look at me and they would say, I had no idea this was going on. Or if they did
Yeah.
suspect their child was using a substance, they would say, I sort of thought something was going on, but I didn't think it was this bad. And these are good parents. These are very good parents doing the best job they can.
Yeah.
Uh, they missed the warning signs because nobody told them what to look for, and that was really the motivation, the passion to write my book, The Addicted Child: A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse.
Mm.
I kept it short, around 100 pages or so, because parents are busy. And I just wanted to give them the basic information to help them feel a little more secure, a little bit more confident, and less afraid of what can be a very scary subject for parents, having
Yeah.
a child that might be using alcohol or drugs.
Yeah, it is very scary. I know in my story, my listeners know that I came through addiction, and it was the same for my parents. They're in complete denial. They didn't realize the depth of it, and so we're felt powerless to do anything about it as well. And of course, when we're in that state, I was not cooperative. I, I was not making it easy to figure it out. And so I just really appreciate you writing this book and to help parents like this in such a practical way. What are some of the drugs that that you're seeing teens use? Especially, it seems like the pandemic, the whole COVID thing seemed to elevate. I don't know if there's stats to support that, but anecdotally, I'm just seeing an incredible increase in not just substance abuse, but also in mental health issues in young people today.
Well, for decades, teenagers have gravitated to primarily two substances, alcohol and marijuana. Those are
Right.
the two substances of preference. For about 3 years prior to the pandemic, what we had seen was an alarming increase in teenagers turning to what is known as
Yeah.
vaping nicotine and vaping marijuana. For 3 years prior to the pandemic, the use was just escalating at alarming, scary rates.
Mm,
Then the pandemic comes along, and what do we find? We find that all this drug use declined substantially during the pandemic. Kids were kept at home, they weren't in school, they weren't associating as much with their peers. So we saw an across the board decline in adolescent substance abuse. We now have data that just became available in the last couple of months about what happened a year after the pandemic. And what we noticed is that there has been a slight increase in kids returning back to substances, especially alcohol, not to the pre-pandemic levels, but they are giving an indication that we may be moving back in that direction with kids, using more of these substances. So it's something we need to keep a close tabs on. Now, you mentioned mental health.
yeah.
We have known for over a decade that there is a mental health crisis among the adolescent population. The pandemic heightened it, but this is a crisis in mental
Mm,
health among our teenage population that's been going on for a decade, and
right.
and sadly, we're just not doing enough to address it.
Yeah. Yeah. And what would you do? You have do you attribute to that to anything specifically, or is it just kind of just overall pressures of life, or do you think I feel like social media plays a huge role in it, but is there anything specific that has been pointed out?
Well, it's a different society than what we had 15, 20, 30
Right.
years ago. Kids are exposed to a lot different things than what they were 20, 30 years ago. You mentioned social media. That's a major influence, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kids are under a lot of social pressures, a lot of academic pressures, the mental health issues, depression, anxiety, you know, emerging personality disorders. All of those come into play, and unfortunately, we're just not providing the resources and the services
Right.
we need, not just for adolescents but for adults too. When
Yeah.
it comes to mental health and substance abuse, we need to do better. We need to be doing a better job.
Yeah, it seems like they're so closely tied today. I think we mentioned when we were talking in the pre-show, just even in my case, right? I had addiction issues. I would say that I had emotional issues from my childhood, but I wouldn't say that I had mental health issues. And so that's a real difference today. I think they're so entwined, the anxiety disorders, the different levels of trauma that kids have experienced, it seems, have gotten worse. And so that's created this almost a combining of or entwining of. Uh, I know when I'm working with people, it seems like you got to kind of untangle the rope. It's so tangled in this, like what's mental health, what's addiction, what was caused by mental health, what's caused by addiction. So, what is there any way of untangling that, or is there any way that you can tell, deal with it before it gets to the addiction level?
Well, unfortunately, we pick up on kids that are using a substance when it becomes obvious that they're doing that.
Right.
And we focus the attention on that. And unfortunately, there are a lot of kids out there who are using a substance who are also struggling with a mental health issue.
Yeah.
And that oftentimes gets undiagnosed and untreated.
Right.
It might be anxiety, it might be depression, it might be an emerging personality disorder, it might be some type of trauma. So we address the addiction, the substance abuse, perhaps because it's more obvious to us.
Right.
And then the underlying emotional issue that that child is struggling with, whether it's depression or anxiety or some other struggle, often gets undiagnosed and untreated.
Right.
So we treat the substance use, but we don't treat the anxiety.
Right.
And that's a prescription for relapse.
Exactly. Exactly. Because if you don't, it's always cause and effect, right? So
Yeah.
if we don't, any addiction recovery, we got to, start there, right?
We got to
Why?
first find out why the person is using this substance. What are they using it
Yes.
for to medicate? And then we need to diagnose and treat that as well. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Why do you think some teens turn to substances, like alcohol and marijuana in the first place?
Every child's different. Every
Yeah.
situation is different.
Yeah.
There is no
Exactly.
one situation that covers everybody. Some get involved because of peer influence, peer pressure. Friends
Right.
that they're hanging around with. They want to
Yeah.
fit in. They want their kid. These kids are drinking alcohol. I'm going to drink alcohol.
Right.
These friends are smoking marijuana. I'm going to smoke marijuana.
Right.
So some of it is who their peers are and what their peers are doing. Um, Others are just curious. They get into it because they've heard this thing called marijuana, and they just want to try it out and see
Yeah.
what it's like. And they like it, they continue. And if they don't, they don't. And then for some, as we were just discussing, there is an underlying mental health issue, an emotional issue, that they're using a substance like marijuana or alcohol to medicate. It might be
Right.
anxiety or depression. Most of the kids, a lot of the kids that I treated at Menninger Clinic who were smoking marijuana, often multiple times a day, when I asked them to help me understand why they were smoking so much marijuana, the number one answer that came back was, it helps me with my anxiety. So
Right.
for some kids, there is this underlying emotional issue that they are using a substance to medicate.
Yes. A lot of it is self-medication, right? And
Yeah.
but my question comes in, maybe you can't answer this, and it's okay if you can't, but I guess I have, the argument I'm hearing these days, and I'm not agreeing with it, but I'm just saying the argument I'm hearing is that doctors also prescribe medication that is no better for them than the marijuana. But I think the difference is the mind altering piece. And so I wonder, is there natural ways, or how can we get this anxiety and maybe some of the mental health issues caught earlier so that it doesn't turn to addiction?
Well, it all comes down to recognizing the warning signs. It's
Yeah.
like anything else. The sooner we can catch something and intervene and treat it, the more likely we are
Right.
to get it resolved at an earlier time. Um, but many times, you know, it's difficult to catch these things early on. We
Yeah.
we miss the warning signs. Parents have never been told what to look for, so sadly, it becomes obvious to them when it becomes a crisis. And
Yeah.
then it's almost too late. Then you're in a panic mode, a crisis mode, and you have to deal with it right
Yeah.
away. And you almost panic with it.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true. I wonder, and we're going to get to those signs. So don't worry, folks. We're going to go there. Some real practical help. I'd like to just touch on the relationship part of this because it's so damaging. I see so many families in crisis because of it. Do you have any thoughts on how a parent can maintain relationship? I always say we need to hold the relationship above the crisis, right? So
Yeah.
how does a parent maintain relationship without enabling and without kind of enabling the behavior? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think a big part of it is communication,
Yeah.
keeping the communication channels open with that child,
Hmm.
letting the child know that you are not judgmental. Um, I think I have a survey in my book that talks about why do kids not want to tell their parents what's going
Right.
on, and the number one reason seems to be that they're afraid of being judged, especially
Yeah.
by their parents.
Right.
So a key is to work on the communication skills, and by that I mean listening skills. We're
Yes.
pretty good at when we talk, we're pretty good at hearing what each one of us says to each other. We get that really good, but we're not so good at hearing the feelings behind those words, and
Yes.
and that's a skill that every parent can practice and every parent can
Yeah.
learn, so that when we're talking to our children, we're not just hearing the words, we're hearing
Yeah.
the feelings behind those words, and we're
Yes.
reflecting them back to the child, and that can be a powerful communication
Yeah.
that allows that child to feel like they're being valued and they're being heard. So my recommendation is work on those communication skills, work on listening to the feelings behind the words that you're hearing, reflect them back to the child to make sure that what you're perceiving, what you think you're hearing, and what you think they're feeling is either right or wrong. It's either correct or incorrect. But that can be a powerful communication style. Listen to the
Yeah.
feelings.
Yeah, so powerful. I agree 100%. When you not just hearing what they're saying, but why they're saying it, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think what happens then is when you do repeat it back and they understand, you understand that validation, that understanding just goes so far to relational connection. It really does. It
yeah,
when a child knows that you hear their hearts and that you can see their pain, it makes them feel connected and it makes them feel safe. And I think that's the key, right? Is to create a safe environment. I heard it. I love the quote, and I can't remember who said it, but it's, if the flower isn't doing well, don't fix the flower, change the environment in which it's growing, and
yeah, yeah. It's good.
the flower will heal itself, right?
Yeah,
And so,
yeah,
in the same way, we need to. A lot of times, I think, just naturally, kids growing up want to extend independence and whatnot. So there's this natural battle that goes on between parents and kids sometimes just because they're fighting for independence. But I often tell parents, don't do the battle in prayer, do the battle in other ways. Don't fight them in the natural, love them in the natural,
yeah,
do the battle in other ways, right? And so,
yeah.
yeah, Richard, that was just so powerful what you just said, and so thank you for that. That was awesome. Why don't we jump into what are some of the early warning signs that parents should know about then? What should they be watching for? I would
Well,
imagine
you
the
know,
earlier you catch it, the better, right?
absolutely. That's the key right
Yeah.
there. The earlier you can catch it, the more likely you are to intervene successfully and help your child and your family get past this.
Yeah.
Um, in my book, I have warning signs for a child that might be using alcohol. I have different warning signs for a child that might be using marijuana. And I included warning signs for a child that might be developing an eating disorder or self-harming
Oh, that's
themselves,
good.
because sometimes an eating disorder and self-injury will accompany a child using a
Yeah.
substance, say marijuana or
Yeah.
alcohol. So it's important parents know a little bit about what those warning signs are as well. As a
Sure.
general rule, what I say to parents is pay attention to the changes that you see in your child. You know your child better than anyone. Pay
Right.
attention to the changes that you see. Don't assume that they're just normal adolescent acting out behaviors.
Right.
They may very well be that, but they may also be an indication that there's something going on underneath the surface that you need to pay attention to.
Right.
Some examples would be a child whose grades are starting to decline, a child who used to enjoy extracurricular activities, maybe sports, no longer shows an interest in doing that. A child who used to introduce you to their friends now becomes very secretive of who their friends are, becomes very secretive about where
Mm.
they've been and what they've been doing. Um, and then, of course, if you find any illicit substances, strange odors, paraphernalia, things like those are obvious warning signs.
They're not holding them for a friend.
And they're not, yeah, yeah, right. Um, eh, And if some of these warning signs sort of come and go fairly quickly,
Right.
these behavioral changes, they come and go fairly quickly. They're probably not too concerning. But if they linger on and on and on, and then you start to see more and more of them, then I think it's time to get some of the assessments done that I recommend in my book, so
Yeah.
you can get a professional evaluation, rule in or rule out if there's an issue, and if there is an issue, get some professional advice on what your next step should be.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So what's give us a couple of those, like when they do see those signs, what's the first thing they should do?
I think the first thing they should do is have a conversation with their child.
Yeah.
And by that I mean you don't want to threaten, you don't want to be angry, you don't want to accuse, you don't want to punish. You want to come at the discussion with what I call an inquiring point of view. In
Right.
other words, I'm seeing these behaviors and I'm concerned. Can you help me understand why I'm seeing these things and why I'm
Right.
concerned? You know, I'm noticing that this is going on and I'm worried about it. Can you help me understand what's going on? So you invite the child into a conversation with you that's focused more on you than it is them, but yet you're talking about the issue
Yeah.
that really concerns you. Um, Now, that's a discussion, quite frankly, that's likely to go one of two ways. It's either going to blow up and the child's going to become defensive and argumentative and angry, or
Yeah.
you might learn something. But regardless of how it goes, if you're still concerned as a parent, you need to get the assessments done that I recommend in my book so you can get a professional opinion as to whether there's an issue that needs to be dealt with and treated.
Yeah, and even if there isn't an issue, it's better to find out there wasn't
Yeah,
than to have missed it and then have to deal with it later. Because
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So and sometimes it can be a little bit, I mean, I think you have to temper that with continued conversation with the child because you don't want them to feel like you're punishing them for not telling you the truth or something. But it's delicate. But I would rather have my kid mad at me and safe than not mad at me and distant. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's going to take some risk. I think that's one thing I think is worthy of saying in this right now is just parent. You're going to have to take risks. You're going to have to push the envelope a little bit, but come at it with that curiosity. Come at it with I love how you said that, like, using even I language, let them know how you're feeling and that you would like to partner together. Like, um, I often tell parents, you go through there's three phases, right? Cop when they're young, and then coach when they're teenagers, and then consultant when they're adults.
Yes.
And so in that coaching phase, you've got to approach it like a coach. You've got to ask questions to get deeper answers. And if you're not getting those answers, then go a little bit further and
Yeah.
don't give up on it. And spend a lot of time with them. And that's really good. What
And
else?
I think that if it does get to the point where you feel, okay, I need to get some professional assessments done here,
Mhm.
your child's going to say no. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I never met a child that wanted to go in for an assessment or for a counseling session. They're gonna say
Yeah.
no, and I suspect that as a parent, it won't be the first time you heard your child say no.
Right.
But and it can be difficult, but believe me, it is critically important. It is so very important that if you feel your child is using a substance, to get those professional
Right.
assessments done so that you can get some guidance as to how severe it is, how
Yeah.
long it's been going on, and if treatment's warranted, what's the best treatment option for you and your family.
Do you have you're in the States and we're in Canada. I'm in Canada. And in Canada, I've heard from parents in my area anyway, and I've heard it quite broad actually, um, that resources are sometimes not there to, like, it's really hard, especially for teenagers. Seems to be lots for, adult mental health issues and whatnot, but the teens have a hard time now. There are some one-stop, they're putting more and more agencies together to have a like a wraparound services type of thing. But um, is there a way that do you have any tips for parents on how to intervene and be the best advocate for their child?
I think I think the best place to start is with the school system. Um, and if you suspect your child is using a substance, I
Right.
would have a conversation with the school counselor, the school social worker, or the school psychologist. Many of them are very capable of doing some of these preliminary assessments for you.
Mm,
If not, they know resources in the community that they can refer you to. But
right.
I think I would start with a discussion with the school counselor, school social worker, or school psychologist, and sort of take guidance from them as to what the next steps are.
Right.
It's a beginning place, depending on where you live. Obviously, if you live in a large urban area, you probably have access to more resources than if you're in a rural area with a smaller population. Um, but I think the school system, the school counselors can probably be your first step for
Yeah.
guidance.
Yeah, and I'll also mention, I think, there's usually counselors in every area. Um, a lot of times we go through the system because we need the financial support. But parents, I could just got to tell you, it's an investment worth making.
Yeah,
Like, just get get somebody, even if you can't get into, when you have an advocate inside. So even a doctor could be an advocate for you to get to the mental health services and to get
yeah,
to addiction services, or your counselor. Yeah, I agree. Go and see your school counselor, and just keep rattling cages until you get somebody to open the door, because they will. When you become the squeaky wheel, they will eventually let you'll get through the door. You
yeah,
have to fight for your child. That's the bottom line there, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So, what are some other warning signs, maybe specific to some of these things? Like, because I think there's quite a broad brushstroke of different drugs and different usages. So, alcohol, partying, weekends, is one level, but then they have access to other things when they're at those parties. Um, is there any specific warning signs that you would want to share?
Well, I think, I mean, if your child overdoses on a drug, or becomes extremely intoxicated, you're going to notice that fairly quickly,
Yeah,
because you're going to see immediate changes in their health and in their behavior.
right,
It's more the subtle things
right,
that parents tend to miss out on, but these are the things that build up over time until it becomes a crisis. And
right.
that's why I say pay attention to the behavior changes,
Yeah,
that seem to be just a little bit out of the ordinary for your child. Those can be indicators that there's something going on underneath the surface. Um, but an occasional exposure to a substance that may be very hard for a parent to pick up on, because the child might try something that they pick up at a party, and
yeah.
unless they overdose on it, you're probably not going to pick up on it as a
Mind
parent.
you, I think one thing we could probably agree on is, the more involved you are in the child's life and knowing where they are.
Yeah,
And I always say quality time happens within quantity time.
yeah,
So it's really important, I think, to make sure you are involved in your child's life and whatnot. And I think that's maybe one of the things that has changed over the years. Like, media and social media is doing more informing to our kids than parents are. And I don't say that as a judgment. I just think that it's easy to miss some of those signs when we're not paying attention. So I just really want to
yeah.
encourage parents, to spend that time with your kids and to really focus on that.
Yeah, that's very important, the quality time that you can spend with your kids. And parents are busy, they're under a lot of
Yeah,
pressure, they're under a lot of stress, and sometimes you know we get overloaded with all of this stuff. But
sure.
those are times when we maybe need to pull ourselves back and say, "Hey, I need to realign things here,
Right.
and spend more time with my kids, and spend more quality time
Right.
listening to them, and doing things with them."
Yeah, and I think it's another, just to encourage parents, the blame game is not going to help you. So don't get beat
Yeah,
yourself up or jump on yourself. you know, the person who takes the drugs is the one responsible for taking the drugs. But at the same time, we want to be responsible in their lives. So it's a really a tension, but don't beating yourself up is not going to help. What you want to do is you could start what Richard is saying anytime. You could start, even if you haven't done it up till now, you can start taking some of these tips that he's giving you,
Yeah.
and you can start applying them now. It's never too late,
No.
even if they're, when I work a lot with people in addiction recovery, and so these are adults that have come through and they're coming out of addiction, but man, the wake of relationships that are destroyed behind them is significant. And I work a lot with helping them rebuild those relationships. But I can tell you the difference between a supportive family and one that doesn't support them because they're mad at them for their addiction and
Yeah.
what happened in the addiction. And when you can forgive and you can realize, you know what, love's got a higher calling on it. We gotta rise up to that love call, not the anger or bitterness or resentment. And yes, there's lots of pain in the addiction, but it was the reception of how the family receives them back and receives them back into the family, especially when they're working hard at staying sober.
Yeah, and I would add also that if you have a child that's going through this when they're into alcohol or drugs, um, and if they're in treatment, it is very important that you have a support system for yourself. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Many parents walk away and they feel guilty. They feel ashamed. They wonder what went wrong. What kind of a parent am I? How did I not see this? What are people thinking about me?
Yeah.
And those are all very normal, very common emotions that a parent will go through once their child, is found out to be using a substance or has been diagnosed or is in treatment. So it's very important that parents build a support system around themselves. This is going to
Yeah.
be a journey,
Yeah.
and maybe it's a close family members, maybe it's members of the church that they participate in, maybe
Mhm.
it's a community support group. But it's very important that as a parent you build that support system around you, because this is going to be a journey, and having a support system will lighten
Yeah.
that load considerably.
Yeah, that's so good, Richard. I agree 100%. I've often said everybody should go through 12-step, not just people with addictions.
Yeah.
That's another thing I've recommended to parents. Go through the 12 steps with your child.
Yeah.
You go through them too, and you learn from it and grow from it, and then you're growing together.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be just addiction. It can just be hurts and hangups that you have, right? So
Right.
join them in the journey of healing, and that then it becomes family healing
Yes.
rather than separate. Yeah,
Yes.
that's so good. I want to circle back to just the mental health stuff for a minute. Do you have anything in sense of like some early warning signs of anxiety, of depression, of is there kind of, are they the same warning signs, or is there some specific ones that a parent can look for?
Well, I mean, there are different behaviors that you might notice with a child that's becoming depressed versus a child that's become very anxious, depending on the severity of the depression or the anxiety. Classroom teachers may pick up on it.
Right.
You may notice a reluctance to get engaged in family activities, social activities,
Mm,
academic activities. Um, and sometimes the level of anxiety or the level of depression can be such low grade that it becomes very difficult to pick up on, and the child even has difficulty communicating that.
right.
But there are some tips that I have on my book's website. I posted an article from Newport, I believe it's Newport Academy, and it is 10 questions that you can ask your child to check in on their mental health.
Oh,
Some of
good.
them are fun, but some of them are very quick. And every once in a while, you could pick one of these questions, and it's a way to check in on your child's mental health. One of them, for example, you would ask your child, you know, if your feelings were weather, what kind of a day would it be outside?
Yeah.
And the child will tell you, well, it's raining outside or the sun's shining or so. But it opens up that discussion
Yeah.
that may lead to how your child is really feeling. And there's 8 or 9 other short little questions that you can ask that allow you every once in a while just to check in on your child's mental health status.
Right. Yeah, that's really good. So how what are do you can you think of any off the top of your head? I should have had some of those open.
Well, that's the one that I think of the
That's
most.
a great
Another,
one, by the way. I like the weather
yeah,
one
that
there.
one's particularly good for a very young child.
Yeah,
Others are another one would be, on a scale of 1 to 10. Tell me how you're doing today. Tell me how you're feeling today.
right.
Um, so the bottom line is, and check in on your
Yeah,
child's mental health every once in a while. See how
yeah,
they're doing. See how they're reacting to things. At least give them an opportunity to talk to you about these
right.
things. It's difficult for them to do, but if you keep it simple, like the weather
Yeah,
analogy,
yeah.
you might get them to be more open towards talking about some of these things.
Yeah, I have an emotion wheel that I provide sometimes for people, and it helps
Hmm.
them. It starts with the big categories and then kind of breaks it down
Yeah,
so that they can kind of put their finger on why they feel the way they feel. So the biggest thing is that it's okay to feel that way. I think too often with parenting, we've tried to correct feelings because we think they're negative. But it's really important to allow your child to feel what they're feeling, but then discover why, go
yeah,
deeper into
yeah,
what the cause and effect is. So, and by acknowledging their feelings, instead of saying, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or you don't feel that way, we should say it's okay to feel that. But I always
yeah.
say contrast the emotion with behavior, right? Like it's okay to feel mad at your brother. It's not okay to throw a toy at his head.
You want to validate their feelings. You want to let them know
Yeah,
it's okay to have these feelings. Now, the behavior associated with those feelings, that might be different. But,
yeah,
it's okay to be angry, but there's an appropriate way
right,
to deal with your anger.
right. Anything on bullying at all? Does that tie into this subject at all? Because I know that bullying can really has caused distress in kids' lives and stuff. But I guess it's kind of the same. Like if all of a sudden they don't want to go to school, if they're fighting going to school on time, those are all signs that maybe there's something going on at school.
Yeah, bullying might be a form of trauma.
Yeah,
And sometimes, in order to medicate that trauma, they will turn to using a
right.
substance. So
Yeah,
that's
or
why
to
it's
or to fit in.
or to fit in, exactly. So that's why it's important to get if you suspect there's something going on, to get some professional assessments done, because parents aren't experts.
Right.
They don't know all of this, and that's why you have to rely on the professionals to do the assessments and give you the advice that will guide you.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a good spot. Let's put a plug in for the book. So if you go to Richard's website, helptheaddictedchild.com. That's helptheaddictedchild.com. I'll also put a link in the show notes. I really encourage you to go buy this book. You can download it on Kindle or you can buy on Amazon and they'll send you a copy. And I just really encourage you to go and get this book. It's a simple book. I think it's kind of like one of those I would say like a parenting manual that you should have a few books on your cupboard to just refer to and to lend out to other friends and family and whatnot, or
Right.
buy them copies. But it's really got some practical tips in it, as you've been hearing, and also some other resources and whatnot. And you can also find those uh, questions, the 10 questions, on that website as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Circling back to just you touched on something that is a form of addiction, but it is, and that is the the food disorders. That is also a pandemic, in my opinion. There's so many out there with anorexia and other forms of uh, dysphoria. So I wonder if you could just speak to a little. Is there some specific tips around that that would help a parent?
Um, the book has the warning signs that you
Yeah,
should be aware of as a parent. Um, you know, I think particularly among adolescent boys, there may be a higher percentage of undiagnosed eating disorders than what we
really?
see in women, in girls.
Mm,
We tend to see more of them in girls, but I think a lot of boys have eating disorders that go undiagnosed.
that's very
Um,
interesting.
but I think uh, the ones that I saw had advanced to almost life-threatening eating disorder status. So
Wow.
again, this is something that as a parent, just be familiar with the warning signs because you want to catch this as early as you can. Self-injury is another one that's a little bit
Right.
harder because kids are very clever about hiding self-injury.
Yeah.
They will self-injure themselves in areas on their body that as a parent, you're probably not going to see, but there are
Right.
certain warning signs that you can look for that as well. So
Can
again,
you share some of those? Is there some off the top of your head you could share from your book?
well, one very obvious one is, when it's summer and it's 90 degrees outside, the kid doesn't want to
Right.
wear summer clothes. They
Right.
don't want to wear a bathing suit. They don't want to go into the pool because they don't want to show, the self-injury marks.
Right.
Um, Other situations you might notice some unexplained blood on some of their clothing.
Okay.
So yeah, there are subtle signs that you can look for. It's tough with self-injury because these kids are clever. They know how to hide it.
Yeah, and it almost became a trend there for a while. I had in our city here, I was dealing with a few families, and a couple of the young ladies that we talked to about self-injury, they just did it because their friend did it, and it said it made them feel better for the moment, right? Because
Well,
there is
that's
actually
the
a
key.
there is actually a chemical release in their brain when they self-harm that releases almost a fake dopamine, right? Like it actually
Yes,
makes them feel a little better, numbs them. Like that's why I say it's like addiction in the sense it's self-medicating. Uh, the,
it is because in many cases, the teenager is self-injuring to medicate an underlying issue.
yeah,
And it's an intolerable thought or feeling or memory that they can't cope with,
yeah,
and they have found that the self injury relieves that internal turmoil, that internal struggle. Um, and it releases that dopamine in the brain, as you mentioned, that
wow,
really gives them the relief. And then
yeah,
it becomes a behavior that repeats itself.
yeah, yeah. And at that point, it really does need treatment, or
Yes.
at least, at least they got to have somebody talk therapy or and whatnot, because it becomes addictive in itself. It becomes very addictive, and actually, addiction to alcohol and drugs is also a form of self harm, and self
Yeah.
medicating. This one is, it can be dangerous, and it can be scary for parents because they think they might be trying to kill themselves, and 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 that's not necessarily the case, but it could also happen accidentally. I've had that
Yes, it could.
experience.
It could. That's right.
And so it's very important to get a hold of it. And again, same things: talk, connection, relationship, feeling valued, feeling like they belong, that they're not the only one isolated and alone. These are all things
Right.
that go through the child's emotions, that they're the only one with this problem. They're the
Right.
so it's just so important to get right in there, and don't give up, parents. Don't give up.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. Any last thoughts that you want to share, Richard? Anything that we've missed, that I've missed, that are
No,
important?
I think we've covered a lot of important issues that I hope everyone who listens to us walks away, feeling as if they've learned some things.
Yeah.
Um, uh, the, the the main point is don't be afraid of this issue.
Yeah.
Don't try to hide from it. You want to feel prepared. Knowledge is power. So the
Yeah.
more you know about this, the less frightened you will be, and the more prepared you will be in the
Mm,
event that you have to deal with it. And that's really the goal of why I wrote the book, is to help parents be better prepared and less afraid. So I thank you, Mark, for giving me the
yeah.
opportunity to talk about this issue with you today.
Yeah. Okay. So once again, helptheaddictedchild.com. And again, I'll put it in the show notes so that you can just click on it and go and order the book and get it right away. And please share this video. If you know family, especially if you have people that you know that are who have kids that they're concerned about, but they're not sure what to do, make sure you send them this video. Make sure you send them this edition of this episode of the podcast, whatever you happen to be listening or watching. Make sure you share it out because this is an important subject matter. Kids are getting hit from all sides these days. The, I mean, it's like unprecedented nowadays with the pressure that they feel, peer pressure wise, social media, and all the different things of the going on in the world. So, parents, you are their safe place. You are be their safe place. Make the changes in your life that you have to make, even in your own healing journey. Make the changes that you need to be strong. Surround yourself, as Richard said, with a strong support network. You don't have to do this alone. We are here. Reach out to us if you need to. You know, you can get me, markgordon.ca. You're always welcome to reach out to me, and I can even refer you on to different places, but I can also help. So please don't do this alone. Don't be scared. You can do this. Relationally, it's so important for you to feel supported, but also to support your child. And so put relationship above everything else. And that means you take risks for the ones you love. All right. Thanks so much for being on this episode, Richard. I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you're doing. And thank you for listening, everybody. We'll see you next episode.